The house that wasn't there. Tom was a seasoned mail carrier, used to the monotony of delivering letters and packages, even in the harshest conditions. Winter didn't bother him much. He'd long since learned to bundle up and endure the biting cold. But on this particular evening, as snow fell in thick sheets and the sky turned a steel grey, Tom felt an unease he couldn't shake. The roads were nearly impassable, and the wind howled through the trees, but there was one more package to deliver. The address was unfamiliar. He'd memorized most of the routes in the small rural town, but this one led him down a narrow, snow-covered road that he'd never noticed before. His GPS struggled to load, the screen flickering as it recalculated the route repeatedly. Eventually, it directed him to a decrepit house at the end of the road. The house didn't look like it belonged to anyone. Its paint was peeling, the windows were boarded up, and the roof sagged under the weight of snow. But a dim porch light flickered, casting an eerie glow over the frost-covered steps. Tom hesitated. Maybe it was abandoned, but someone had ordered the package. His job was to deliver it. Clutching the box, he stepped onto the porch. The wood creaked ominously under his weight. He knocked on the door, but no one answered. He tried again, louder this time, and the door creaked open on its own. "Hello?" Tom called out, his voice swallowed by the cold air. Inside, the house smelled of damp wood and decay. The faint sound of laughter floated through the air, followed by a child's cry. "Hello? Is someone there?" he asked again, stepping inside. The door slammed shut behind him, making him jump. He spun around, but there was no one there. The laughter and crying stopped abruptly, leaving an oppressive silence. Uneasy, Tom decided to leave the package on a dusty table near the entrance. He turned back to the door, only to find it gone. The wall was seamless, as if the door had never existed. Panic set in. He ran to a window, but all he saw outside was endless white snow. No van, no road, no world beyond. The walls seemed to pulse, the wood shifting and groaning like a living thing. He stumbled backward, and the floor beneath him turned to ice. His breath fogged as the temperature plummeted. When he looked down, he saw his reflection in the ice. But it wasn't his reflection. It was a pale, frozen corpse staring back at him, its mouth moving silently. The laughter returned, louder and more menacing this time. Shadows moved along the walls, growing closer, their shapes inhuman and jagged. Tom tried to run, but the ice beneath him cracked. He fell, plunging into icy darkness. He clawed at the surface, trying to pull himself out, but invisible hands dragged him deeper. His screams echoed as the icy water swallowed him whole. Days later, Tom's mail truck was found abandoned on a snow-covered road. The engine was still running, but there was no sign of him. Locals whispered about the house, claiming it had burned down decades ago after a family mysteriously vanished. But every winter, someone would get a delivery request to that address, and they'd never be seen again. The package that kept coming back. Lisa loved her job as a mail carrier. It gave her a sense of routine and purpose, and she enjoyed the little interactions with the people on her route. But there was one package that had been haunting her for weeks. A small black box, no bigger than a shoebox, kept showing up at the post office, addressed to an old woman named Mrs. Whitaker. Each time Lisa delivered it, it would mysteriously return to the post office the next day, undelivered. Frustrated, Lisa decided to confront Mrs. Whitaker directly. She drove to the woman's house, a tiny cottage at the edge of town, surrounded by overgrown shrubs and trees. Mrs. Whitaker answered the door, her frail figure wrapped in a thick shawl. "Please, stop bringing it," the old woman pleaded, her voice trembling. "It's not for me, it's for you." Lisa was taken aback. "What do you mean? It's addressed to you." The woman shook her head vehemently. "I've never opened it. and neither should you. Take it back. Leave it alone." She slammed the door, leaving Lisa standing in the cold with the package still in her hands. Feeling unnerved, Lisa left the box on the woman's porch and drove home. But the next morning, the box was waiting for her on her doorstep. This time, her name was on it. Lisa's curiosity got the better of her. She opened the package and found a cracked mirror inside. As she stared into it, the reflection in the mirror didn't match her movements. Instead, it showed a shadowy figure standing behind her. She spun around, but there was no one there. The air in her house grew colder, and faint whispers filled the room. That night, Lisa's reflection began moving independently, mouthing words she couldn't hear. When she tried to smash the mirror, the shards scattered across the room, each reflecting the same shadowy figure. Her lights flickered, and the whispers grew louder, turning into a deafening roar. By morning, Lisa was gone. Her co-workers found the black box sitting on her desk, now addressed to one of them. No one dared open it, but it wasn't long before another mail carrier vanished, and the box found its next target. The red envelope. Dave prided himself on his efficiency as a mail carrier. He knew every house on his route like the back of his hand. But one winter evening, he was given a red envelope with no return address. It was addressed to a farmhouse on the edge of town, a place he rarely visited. The snowstorm made the drive treacherous, but he managed to reach the house just as the last light of day faded. The farmhouse was old, but well kept, with smoke curling from the chimney. He knocked on the door, and an elderly man answered, his face lined with worry. When Dave handed him the envelope, the man's expression turned to fear. "Take it back. I don't want it," he said, his voice trembling. "I can't take it back," Dave replied. "It's addressed to you." The man refused to touch it. "You shouldn't have brought it here. Now it's too late." He slammed the door, leaving Dave standing in the cold with the envelope. Perplexed, Dave left it in the mailbox and drove off. As he glanced in his rearview mirror, he saw the old man standing in the snow, holding the red envelope and staring at him. Dave tried to shake off the unsettling image, but that night, he found the same envelope on his kitchen counter. This time, it had his name on it. Inside the envelope was a photograph of him standing at the farmhouse, holding the envelope. In the background, a shadowy figure loomed just behind him. Dave's blood ran cold. He checked his house, locking every door and window, but the unease wouldn't leave. At midnight, his power went out, and a knock echoed through the house. When he opened the door, no one was there. The red envelope lay on the doormat, and the figure from the photograph now stood at the edge of his yard, closer than before. By morning, Dave's mail truck was found abandoned on the snowy road. The red envelope sat on the dashboard, now addressed to someone new. No one ever found Dave. The snowman's shadow. Ellie hated winter deliveries, but she couldn't afford to miss a shift. One icy evening, she was assigned a package for a house on the outskirts of town. The yard was filled with snowmen, their faces contorted into eerie expressions. Some had wide, jagged mouths, others had hollow, empty eyes. Feeling uneasy, Ellie left the package on the porch and turned to leave. As she reached her van, she heard the crunch of snow behind her. One of the snowmen had moved closer. She laughed nervously, brushing it off as her imagination. But as she drove away, she swore the snowmen were watching her. That night, her dog barked incessantly at the front door. Peeking outside, Ellie saw one of the snowmen from earlier standing in her yard. She locked the doors and turned off the lights, but by morning, there were 5 snowmen encircling her house. She called the police, but they dismissed her concerns, claiming it was likely a prank. As night fell again, Ellie heard heavy footsteps on her roof. A cold draft swept through her room, and she turned to see a figure made entirely of ice standing at the foot of her bed. Its hollow eyes stared into hers, freezing her in place. Ellie disappeared that night. Days later, new snowmen appeared in her neighborhood, each with a face eerily resembling hers. Locals say the snowmen only appear during blizzards, and anyone who sees them is never heard from again.